So factoring is really the reverse of multiplying. And what we're looking for here is we're looking for an end answer that has two binomials that we're multiplying together. So I'll have them in parentheses. Now this first one, these actually first two here are kind of more difficult, especially when we see this 3 in front of the x squared and this 2 in front of the x squared. So I'm going to use a method that's using a box, and it allows me not to have to guess or check at all. It gives me a little bit of organization I can for doing this. So if I look at some of the patterns from a past one, when I looked up here and I multiplied out and I got this x squared minus 2x minus 15, these really came easily from up here, that this x squared and this negative 15 came from those two. And so we're going to see that in the box right away, and I'm going to write that in this box immediately. So I'm going to put my 3x squared in here and my negative 12. So these first two ones are going to be placed in there. I'm just going to write a note here. So what we're really doing here is placing first and last terms in the box. Then if I look at how I get that negative 2x, well, that negative 2x up here really came from when we added, this one and this one, we got the negative 2x. So I know that that negative 5x really comes from adding those two. So I'm going to make a note here is really what we're going to do is we're going to look to see what adds to middle term. So I'm looking for what adds to be negative 5x. So that middle term is what I'm using here. Now there's a lot of things that add to be negative 5x, so we need another criteria. So if I look above here, and if I multiply these together, I get a negative 15x squared. And if I multiply these together, I get a negative 15x squared. And that works actually for any time we see this box here. So what that means too is if I multiply these together, it should be the same thing as if I multiply the other diagonal together. So what I'm looking for is it multiplies to be a negative 36x squared. So adds to I'm going to say the product of first and last term. So we're looking for two things that where that occurs, and that will tell us what goes in those last two boxes. Okay, so once we find those two values, we're going to place those two values in the box. So I like to start with the multiply part because I'm limited in what things multiply to be that negative 36. I'm going to focus more on the 36, and we'll see how that x squared comes into there. We'll see how the negative comes in there. I do know that there's going to be one positive, one negative. I'm just focusing on 36. If I'm really being really systematic about it, I'm going to start with 1 and 36 in my pairs. 2 goes into 36 18 times. 3 goes into 36 12 times. 4 goes into 36 9 times. 5 does not go into 36, but 6 goes in 6 times. And this is actually where I can stop because on the other side I have the number that matches up with it. I could try 7, doesn't go into it, 8 does not go into it, and then 9 is already listed on here, so I know I have all my factor pairs. Now to get this negative 36, I need 1 negative and 1 positive. I know I want it to add to be a negative value, so I'm going to make the bigger one negative, because that will add up to a negative value. And this right here looks like my magic combination that's going to equal a negative 5. So when I multiply, it's negative 36. When I add, it's negative 5. So really for this, I'm going to be using a 4x and a negative 9x. And I'm placing those in the box. It doesn't matter which one goes which. I'm going to put the 4x here and the negative 9x up here. Let me get rid of this red diagonal here. Oops. Okay, so now from here, we're really close to getting our answer. And I know this might seem like a lot of steps right now, but we'll get fluency with it with practice, and this also allows us so we don't have to really guess or check. So now what I want you to do is we're going to look at this row right here, and we're going to see what they both divide by so we can take that out. So if I look at numbers, they both divide by 3, and there's not always a number, sometimes it's just 1, and then they both have an x in it. So really 3x is what I can take out. Okay, so I'm going to write a note here, and I'm going to say factor out the common multiple in the rows and columns. Now technically I could go through this each row and do that, but I also do have, I could kind of do this as a puzzle too. So now I have 3x, and whatever was up here should multiply to be this 3x squared. So 3x times x would do that. I can do this 3x times what will give me negative 9x. That would be negative 3, so I'll place that up here. And if I go down here, this x on top times this value out in front will give me 4x, so that would be 4. Okay, I usually double check to make sure that 4 times negative 3 does give me that negative 12. Okay. But if you notice that horizontal row, like if you notice in these two, they both divide by 4. It's the greatest common multiple they have. If I look at these two, they both divide by 3 and they both have a negative. Actually, if they start leading with a negative, usually we take that negative out. Okay. All right, so now we actually really have our answer. So I see this x minus 3 in the top there, and this 3x plus 4. This would be my answer then. Okay, so I'm going to try that same technique over here. Probably go a little bit quicker because I already have my directions written out. So I'm going to place that 2x squared and the 9 here. I'm looking for it to add to be that middle term, so negative 11x, and I want it to multiply. And I need to multiply those together so I get the 18x squared. So I look at factors of the 18, 1 and 18, 2 and 9, 3 and 6, and that's all I have. They're going to multiply to be a positive, but add to be a negative, so I'm going to have 2 negatives. So I'm going to make both of these negative. And I'm looking to get a negative 11. This is my magic 1. So I'm going to put a negative 2x and negative 9x. Make sure you include that x, because that's how we add to get that negative 11x term. And that's how when you multiply them, we get that x squared in there. So now I'm just going to factor out what's in common. So that first row, there's no number they have in common, but there's an x. Okay, so now I'm going to go look vertically. So either I could look at both numbers, so they both divide by 2 and by x. Also, if I double check, 2x times x does give me 2x squared. So x times a negative 9 will give me a negative 9x, and 2x times negative 1 will give me that negative 2x. And I am getting that 9 at the very end. So my answer is 2x minus 9 times an x minus 1. Okay. So practice this. Okay, and there are some ways to speed it up. Some are can be a little bit quicker, and I'll show you that in another video.